You have a grandstand seat here to one of the most momentous events in the history of science. In less than a minute, you will see the most powerful explosion ever witnessed by human eyes.
Well, at least an explosion of knowledge. Welcome to the truth. It's been waiting. With commentary on the news, reviews, and interviews, it's the Libertarian Links webcast.
Ranting on the internet so that when I come to your house for dinner, I don't have to. Welcome to the Libertarian Links webcast. And I can guarantee you we are not going to be talking about that tonight. I'd like to thank everybody for their support for the first show. We're going to cut this one down a little bit. The last one ran a little long. I had a lot to talk about being the first show. But we're going to shorten it tonight. And I'd like to introduce you to our producer and engineer, but I can't because she's still sleeping in the other room. Let's get right to the first story on the Libertarian Links Facebook page. Obama claims Syria behind the chemical attack without evidence. My tagline, but it's an AP story. Washington. President Barack Obama on Wednesday declared unequivocally that the United States has concluded that the Syrian government carried out a deadly chemical weapons attack on civilians. New hurdles emerged but appeared to slow the formation of an international coalition that could use military force to punish Syria. Obama did not present any direct evidence to back up his assertion that the Syrian government bears responsibility for the attack. That's because there is no evidence. They haven't come upon any evidence, and the United Nations hasn't even found any evidence yet. They haven't ruled. Nobody knows. Nobody has ruled. Nobody said anything about this. We don't know who's behind it. And we'll look into that a little bit later, a little bit deeper in the show. But Obama's ready to go. And this is all because he said a few months ago that there would be a red line. There's a red line, and if it gets crossed, we're going to go in. While he said he's still evaluating possible military retaliation, the president vowed that any response would send a strong signal to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. We have concluded that the Syrian government in fact carried these out, Obama said during an interview with PBS NewsHour. And if that's so, then there need to be international consequences. Now, he's not alone in government. There are Republicans who want this as well. John McCain, speaking to Neil Cavuto on Fox News, said that he thinks that this is a moment that we can switch the momentum. He said, if we were to launch a military attack against Syria, it should be to change the tide of battle between President Bashar al-Assad's regime and the rebel forces. Now remember, in the last show we talked about how these rebel forces are actually Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda affiliated groups. So what John McCain is saying here, and he goes, I think that it could really have an effect on the eventual overthrow on a person who is now clearly a war criminal by using these weapons of mass destruction. So he's attributing the chemical weapons attack to Assad. And he's saying we need to turn the tide of battle because remember, Assad's winning the fight against the Al-Qaeda forces in Syria. He says we need to turn the tide of battle against Assad and in favor of Al-Qaeda to overthrow the Syrian government, which would inevitably lead to an Al-Qaeda-controlled Syria. This is crazy. And finally, there's another story. We'll go to the next story on Libertarian Links page. There's some sanity coming out of our government, and it's coming from a Democrat. Dennis Kucinich. A Syria strike would make U.S. Al-Qaeda's Air Force. Former Representative Dennis Kucinich, Democrat from Ohio, cautioned against hasty military action in Syria Tuesday during an interview with The Hill, claiming that airstrikes would help Al-Qaeda and lead to a much broader conflict. Quote, so what? We're about to become Al-Qaeda's Air Force now? Very, very good point. And I'd like to point out that now it's finally become mainstream news, confirmed. These rebels are Al-Qaeda. He goes on. This is a very, very serious matter that has broad implications internationally. And to try to minimize it by saying we're just going to have a targeted strike, that's an act of war. It's not anything to be trifled with. He's absolutely correct. Any attack that we launch against Syria is an act of war. And Syria has strong allies, Russia, China, and Iran, who don't want to see us attack Syria and are very vocal about wanting us to not attack Syria. And we don't even have good evidence. We don't have any evidence that Syria is behind it. There's a little more sanity. I've been of the opinion that over the last 10, 15 years, we as Americans have become polarized, which means we've shifted to one side or the other in politics. Democrat, Republican. And if you're a Democrat, Republican, bad. If you're a Republican, Democrat, bad. Like sheeple, repeating it. Democrat bad, Republican good. Republican bad, Democrat good. Well, I think that stuff like this brings us out of that polarization and back towards the middle. 60% of Americans oppose intervention in Syria, right? Just 9% support intervention. 9% of Americans support the president's decision to intervene in Syria. 60% are against it. This is a very unpopular thing that he's doing. Not only among the people, but among lawmakers too. At last count, there were over 100 congressmen and women who say they want to have a say on the strike. A growing minority of lawmakers in both parties are demanding that Barack Obama seek approval from Congress before launching a strike on Syria. This is very important. They want him to come to them for approval to attack another country. But Obama doesn't think he has to. He thinks he has the power to do whatever he wants, and is evidenced by our next story. Obama administration shreds the Constitution and says it can wage war unconditionally. Now this comes from a video interview that was done with then Defense Secretary Leon Panetta. He spoke before Congress, and this was the question asked by one of the senators. His name was Jeff Sessions. He asked, concerning Syria, do you think that you can act without Congress to initiate a no-fly zone in Syria without congressional approval? This was the question he asked. A no-fly zone is an act of war. That's basically saying we are going to control the air above your country and you can fly nothing. They will not allow any aircraft into the air. And anything that goes into the air is shot down immediately. So he's asking the Defense Secretary, Leon Panetta, of our government, do you think that you need to ask congressional approval to have a no-fly zone to conduct an act of war? Leon Panetta answers the congressman, again, our goal would be to seek international permission, and we would come to Congress and inform you and determine how best to approach this. Whether or not we would get permission from Congress, I think those are issues we would have to discuss as we decide what to do here. Basically, he's saying, we will get permission from the international community, not Congress. So Jeff Sessions asked, do you need permission to carry out an act of war? Panetta answers, we'll get permission from the international community, the United Nations, or NATO. Then we will come back and tell you what we're going to do. Jeff Sessions knows what he's saying and answers this way. Well, I'm almost breathless about that because of what I heard you say is we are going to seek international approval and then we will come and tell the Congress what we might do and we might seek congressional approval. He says I'm breathless. He was so taken aback by the disregard for Congress's authority. Panetta then goes on to explicitly state that the president has the authority to act in the defense of the nation without congressional approval, and that a NATO resolution would be all the legal justification the administration needs in order to wage yet another foreign war. There have been people saying for years that our military, that our government is under the control of the internationalists, of the New World Order, of the bankers. And here, Leon Panetta is saying what NATO says is what goes. If they give us permission, we will do it. We don't need yours. We don't need the American people. We don't need Congress. We need NATO. And if NATO says do it, we do it. He also says to act in the defense. How is attacking Syria, because they allegedly launched a chemical weapons attack on their people, an act of defense on our part? We are not threatened. This is not a threat to the United States of America. Now, this opinion contradicts what Obama has said in the past is his opinion on war powers. Daily Caller. As President Barack Obama weighs action in Syria, it remains unclear whether he will seek first congressional approval. It is clear, however, that Obama once thought such authorization was necessary. Quote, the president does not have... Let me put my ears on. The president does not have the power under the Constitution to unilaterally authorize a military attack in a situation that does not involve stopping an actual or imminent threat to the nation. Let me be clear. Candidate Obama told the Boston Globe in late 2007. He added that the president can only act unilaterally in instances of self-defense. This is not self-defense. This is an act of war, an unprovoked act of war against another country in support of Al-Qaeda. Now, remember what I said earlier about the chemical weapons. There's no proof that it was the Syrian government. Actually, there is some evidence to suggest they had no idea what was going on. There were intercepted phone calls by Israeli intelligence that shows that immediately after the attack, the leadership and the command structure of the Syrian military was crazy, seeking who did this, what's going on, who gave authorization for this, we didn't authorize this, blah, 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 and blah, blah. I'm not going to go into that today. I'm not going to have anything about that. But what I will have is an article from Yahoo News. Now, Yahoo News is the #1 internet site for news today. This article is from January 30th. U.S.-backed plan to launch chemical weapon attack on Syria and blame it on Assad's government. This is from January 30th. Now you can find this online. They were leaked documents. Leaked documents that were picked up that indicate that the U.S. had authorized and okayed a plan to launch chemical weapons in Syria and attack Assad, blame Assad. There was an attack a few months ago, and I talked about that in the last show. This is the second chemical weapons attack in Syria. The first one was a few months ago. This is regarding that first attack. The UN's Del Ponte says evidence Syrian rebels used sarin. Testimony from the victims conflict in Syria. Testimony from victims of the conflict in Syria suggests the rebels have used nerve gas agent sarin, a leading member of the UN Commission inquiry said. So this says here, the evidence for that attack suggests the rebels used it. That's why you didn't hear much about it. That's why it wasn't a big deal. And we weren't saying, we need to go to war. Because the rebels, the UN decided that it was probable that the rebels had done it. This time we're not waiting for a UN investigation to conclude who did it. We're ready to jump the gun. ready to go to war. Now let's think about this. Assad's winning. Assad is winning this fight. Obama says there's a red line. Don't use chemical weapons. If you cross that, we're coming in. He's winning. Why would he use chemical weapons? Why would he risk the United States coming in and turning the tide of the war? Why would he invite UN inspectors to come in and then shoot at them after they got there? And why doesn't McCain, Lindsey Graham, Barack Obama want to wait to see what the investigation concludes? Because the last time it concluded that the rebels were probably responsible. And we know from leaked documents that the U.S. had a plan to launch sarin gas attacks and blame it on Assad's government. This is absolutely crazy. But most Americans know it. Only 9% support this fight. Only 9% think we should go to war over this. People are waking up. But they're not going to like that. They don't want us to wake up. They want us to pay attention to Miley Cyrus. They want us to forget what they're doing and not look at the facts and not look at the stories and not investigate what's happening. But we know different. We know what they're doing. We're not going to let them get away with this. We're going to hold them accountable. This is very dangerous. An attack on Syria could bring Russia in, could bring Iran in, could bring China in, could bring Israel in to a large-scale, prolonged, and potentially nuclear conflict. This isn't a game. Obama should be thinking twice about this. He's betrayed everybody who voted for him. He's changed his stance on everything he stood for. Closing Guantanamo, not going to close it. End the war in Iraq, didn't want to end it. Went on for years afterwards. End Afghanistan, we're just ending it now, and he's into his second term. He thinks that the president should seek authority from Congress to wage war. Not going to wait, not going to do it. One last thing. Thank you very much for supporting the first show. Everybody who watched it, everyone who liked the page, thank you so much. We made some technical improvements since the first show, and hopefully we're going to keep getting better. I really appreciate everyone's support as we attempt to wake up America and to disseminate this information, to give it to people, to make them informed, so that they could be a living part, an awake part of the United States of America, and so that we can stop the encroachment of government and prevent complete tyranny from taking over.